Did you get that feeling that this band was amazing at controlling the chaos that they would produce with their instruments?
It sounds like the music has many layers and you're enjoying every bit of it, even though you sometimes struggle to catch all the moments, right?
Yes, exactly. And you know what the most amazing thing is? That while there are all these, let's say, stoner parts with heavy guitars and this thunderous bass and thunderous drums, there are also a lot of parts where they tone it down and sound very psychedelic and atmospheric, almost like Pink Floyd circa 1970, 1971. I really get that feel from some of the tracks, like I think The End or Cry. For example, that song also has a guitar loop, something that the Beatles and the Byrds used to do, where they would reverse the guitars. So they use that effect too. And in a sense, the record sounds very 1960s like, like as if it was recorded in 1969 rather than 1973, which I think is not a bad thing. You may say, oh, it was already outdated at that time, but the truth is, this kind of music is timeless, so it really doesn't matter which year it was recorded in.
It's legendary.
Yes, uh, and then the absolute, well, maybe I don't know if this is the absolute highlight because there are so many great songs, but okay, I'll single out two songs. Um, on the Road to Chaos, Na drumu za haos, and Sjaju očima. Those two songs, especially like on the Road to House, it's so intense. It's almost like the band is about to explode, um, and then Sjaju očima is like the culmination of the whole record. And following this track, I think the record kind of tones it down a bit, but it means like the glow in your eyes, the shine of your eyes, and of course it sounds very much like an homage to taking acid, to experience a narcotic trip together. I don't know. That's my interpretation of that song, and the vocals are so ecstatic. It's like you feel like the whole band is consumed by ecstasy, and that's something that I find to be extremely rare, especially in Yugoslav rock. What do you say about that, Alexander?
Yes, this was really unique, and honestly, I don't think that I've ever heard many bands that sound like this. Maybe that's due to some sort of shortage in my catalog, but this was truly, truly authentic, Vlada, especially in the Yugoslav context.
That's for sure. I mean, uh, I feel, of course, if you're into '60s rock, if you're into Jimi Hendrix, if you're into acid rock or stuff like Blue Cheer, maybe. But I don't know. It's hard to reference other artists. Maybe Hendrix is the most recognizable influence here. But I feel that everything else is very much a unique sound of this band, and that it cannot be replaced with anything else. And that's why I find it so special. And I love the end of the record is very cosmic, like, with the Return to the Stars is the name of one of the tracks, with a very poignant melody. It feels almost like you're floating in space, and
They
there's
kind
weird.
of slow things down towards the end of the album,
Yeah,
right?
which I think is deliberate, of course, because it's like a trip, right? There's a high, and then after the absolute high, which I feel is Sjaju očima, then they take it down, right? Like just like in real life, after you experience that culmination, after taking a drug, you start going down, right? And this is exactly what they do on the record as well. There's like a certain kind of passion bursting from every single guitar note, and the vocals can be so ecstatic at times, and then you have all these weird sounds like bird sounds, kind of Pink Floydish. Yeah, I mean, what else can be said about this? This is just mind-blowingly good, and it's a crying shame that this band only recorded two studio records and one live record, and all of them are highly recommended. You can find all of their stuff compiled together. There's a certain anthology that was released a few years ago, so you may want to look that up. You can easily find this music, of course, on I think Deezer and Spotify. And it's awesome that they re-released the entire catalog of this band, and that Kiselina was released as it was originally intended. Unfortunately, a lot of old Yugoslav rock music has not been re-released, and you can only find very inferior recordings on YouTube. You know, people recording their vinyl and stuff like that, which is a crying shame. So I honestly hope that more of the old records will be re-released, much like Pop Machina's whole output was put out there for everyone to enjoy. So, Alexander,
Yeah,
let's go to our final comments here. What do you have to say for the end of this review?
I think this was a great listen. Definitely going back to this, keeping it in my virtual catalog. So just really good. I mean, we described everything here, and I think we were quite spot on. So for that reason, I think this record deserves a 9 from me, a 9 out of 10. And the highlight track here is, let me give it a look. I think Povratak Zvezdama, or in English, Return to the Stars.
All right, I'll also give it a 9. I think this record should be an absolute classic among all those who love psychedelic psych rock, who love that kind of edgy hard rock but psychedelic sound at the same time. No reason why you shouldn't at least give it a listen. You can easily find this record on YouTube, on Spotify, on Deezer. If you love it enough, you can pick up the reissue. Um, the language barrier is not that much of a problem, even though I guess you might miss out on some of the psychedelic lyrics, but I think the energy is so palpable that it doesn't really matter, and you can sense what it is about just by listening to it. You know, it's so trippy, it's so out there, it's so groovy, to use a hippie adjective, because this record kind of deserves it. So, a very unique piece of music, and very unconventional for the context in which it was made. I think if you listen to U Grupa, for example, you see that they kind of they sound kind of conventional by comparison. You know, with all their great music ideas, they didn't really have that kind of craziness that Pop Machina possessed.
Yo Grupa just, I think they just didn't want to take that many risks compared to Pop Machina, right?
Yes, and I think that's why they were also much more popular eventually. Uh, but I don't know. We weren't there. Maybe they just did the music that they wanted to do, and that's it. You know, like we cannot interpret these things so easily from this perspective and with our hindsight. Like the most important thing is that these two bands are absolutely legendary, in my opinion. And U Grupa, for example, I think deserves much more respect. And a lot of Yugoslav rock fans kind of look down on them now because their music is not what it used to be, and they may not even realize how great their music was at one point. So, and Pop Machina has also been somewhat overlooked. I feel very often when people speak about old Yugoslav rock, they omit Pop Machina, and I think the main reason for it was that this band was not the kind of band that wanted to pander to the general taste, and for that reason, they're all better for it, you know, um, because it's just something timeless that I feel has a global reach, and I hope that this music reaches more people.
Would you like to go back to your ratings and picking a favorite track?
Yeah, okay, so 9, as I said, and my favorite track is Sjaju Očima. the glow in your eyes. All right, so now we're moving a bit forward in time, and we want to talk about New Wave. And New Wave in the Yugoslav society was such a big deal. These bands were really challenging conventions, much like Pop Machina did before them, albeit in a completely different way. These bands were out there to challenge the status quo, to make people think, to make people question their Philistine ways, to put it that way. And out of all these out of all these great bands, one band in particular stood out for me. It's Charlo Krobata. And unfortunately, they only made one record, and they made another one together with two other very well-known new wave acts, Električni Orgazam, and who was the third one? Idoli, yes, and Idoli. So, Alexander, how did you feel about this record? This is not your usual rock record. This is something else, I feel, right?
Yeah, and I felt really good. um, yeah, this was a different listen. This was a different experience, but it doesn't take any way from it. This was enjoyable to listen. It's so crazy. It's so spontaneous. It reminds me of the fall. In some parts, I'm just really glad that Yugoslavia had such a rich new wave scene, which was revolutionary in a way. It had those lyrics and those messages that weren't easy to decipher, but you could still get the point, and you loved it. You loved that way of communicating with the public, and also I have to say, maybe this is not a proper comparison, but this album reminded me a bit of the Minutemen, Vlada.
Oh, I was just about to say that. You just stole it from me. And it's absolutely a proper comparison. I think these bands are kind of peers. And it's absolutely mind-blowing how two bands in completely different countries, in completely different parts of the world, kind of developed a very similar sound that I feel was quite unique to those two bands. I mean, it's very, very reminiscent of the Minutemen for all the good reasons. Of course, it's kind of different still. I feel like this is not just a rock record. This is almost like some kind of artistic statement. The record is all over the place. It might even feel a tad pretentious at first, but it's also wild and imaginative, very powerful and heavy at times. Especially the drums and the guitar is kind of just like the Minutemen. It doesn't really have distortion, but it just cuts like a knife through the sound. And there's this very rhythmic drums and bass in the background, almost jazzy in a way. Sometimes they sound like a bizarre version of the Police because they have those elements that the Police had, flirting with reggae, that kind of stuff. But then it's much more dissonant. It's much more chaotic, deliberately chaotic. And I kind of love that about it. I think it's very challenging. It makes fun of the Philistine society. In the lyrics as well, they are filled with these sardonic statements, very sarcastic, very provocative. I can only imagine how the politicians at the time might have felt about it, if they even understood any of it. Because originally this band was supposed to be released by the label in Belgrade, the state label in Belgrade. But the thing was that they didn't really understand this record. They didn't know what to make of it. So they just gave up on it, and it was picked up by the Zagreb label in Croatia. So it was released by Jugoton in Croatia. And it only sold 10,000 copies. But nowadays it's considered one of the greatest classics of the Yugoslav New Wave.
What a shame, man. What a shame.
But this kind of record cannot be sold at a greater number initially because it's too artistic. It's too commercially inaccessible. This is not accessible music by any measure, but it's super exciting and it's super weird. Uh, it's weird in a very unique way. Let's put it that way. There's a
Yeah, in
certain
a very
atmosphere.
intelligent way.
Yes, there's a certain atmosphere of tension throughout the record, and there's a certain generational outcry. You almost feel like these guys are stomping over everything that came before them. For example, all these guys were influenced by the bands that we mentioned, U Group and Pop Machina, but none of this is reminiscent of that music. It's like building a completely new world, you know? And that's what I find most exciting about it.
Just looking at the track listing, and every track is a highlight here. Every track offers something, and I just love that sense of humor, especially in the last track here. It was, yeah, Pazite na decu, take care of the children. Do you remember the
They,
lyrics of
they
that song?
actually cited a book by a famous, I think, 19th century or early 20th century, I'm not sure, a famous writer, Vasa Pelagic. They just took his book and they cited stuff from that book. And actually, that book has the same name as the record. Uh, Bistri ili tupli čovek biva kad, which means brighter or more stupid a man is when, right? So, um, I mean, that's the thing, that they would take something old and they would incorporate it in a way where it can be understood on different levels, like something sarcastic or a commentary on the current state in the society. And that's how I understood this record, as an outcry against, this kind of conventional society where everything had to be done in a certain way. I feel that's their rebellion. And unfortunately, this band kind of imploded too quickly, and their members went on to have two very successful bands, EKV and Disciplina Kičme. And these are also bands that are worth checking out. In some people's opinions, these might be even better bands in some ways. But I don't necessarily agree with that. I think this is so unique that even their later day work is not up to par. But unfortunately, the drummer passed away. He was one of the first people in Yugoslavia to contract HIV, and he passed away back in the 80s. That whole generation had a very tragic story because they were trying to change the world, and then they had to witness the collapse of this great and beautiful country that collapsed in such a horrendous way thanks to nationalists. But that's a whole different story, which is not for this podcast. So, Alexander, let's get to our highlights here. What do you say? What's your favorite track and what's your rating?
Ooh, that's really tough, Vlada. This is, I think, the toughest part of this episode. Okay, the rating is not tough. I think this is a solid 9 out of 10. A fantastic album, just something that I would always recommend to anyone, to any outsider, and to anyone from the Balkans. I think this album, as you said, is not that popular, unfortunately. I mean, I'm still shocked by that information, but it's up to us fans to keep this going and promote it
And
in a way.
it was reissued so by Croatia Records, or what used to be known as Yugoton. So you can easily pick it up on CD, I think. I think you can even order it from their website, Croatia Records. And I think it's an absolute must. That and another record called Paket Aranžman, which was done by Šarlo Krobata, Električni Orgazam, and Idoli. So it's a record featuring 3 bands. So if you're really into this kind of crazy, quirky, new wave stuff, bands like Per Ibi or bands like the Minutemen, you may really appreciate this, right?
Absolutely, Vlada. Okay, I have finally found my favorite track. It's the last track that I mentioned earlier during the episode. So it's Pazite na decu 2. And back to you now, Vlada.
And my favorite track here would be, I think it's very hard to decide. I kind of feel like this whole record should be listened to at once, without
Spot on.
skipping anything. So, but I would say Samo Ponekad was an excellent track, or Oh. I don't know. Let's say Samo Ponekad, only sometimes, because it encapsulates what this band is all about, because it's about this person who always wants to do the right thing, but sometimes he lets go of it, right? Sometimes he dares to challenge himself or herself. So I think that that's spot on. That's exactly what they were trying to point out in the society, how people are too conventional, trying too hard to blend in, never taking risks. And this whole record is a major risk. So as such, it really should be listened to as a document of a certain movement, of a certain mindset, and it really shows the wealth of the Yugoslav culture at the time. I think there was much going on at the time, and unfortunately nowadays, if we look at all the former Yugoslav republics, I feel like even though there are some admirable artists, I feel like nobody has that kind of level of originality or that kind of level of just challenging the status quo, not giving in
I
to the
think
outside
most bands
pressure.
nowadays just agree to sound mediocre or to
No, I
please.
mean, there's still, let's not be that way. There's still a lot of talented artists, but unfortunately nowadays it's much more difficult to succeed or to be seen or heard. Even bands like Charlotte Krobat at that time had a nice venue where they could be heard and seen. They were even featured in films. And nowadays, if you have a good alternative band in, say, Serbia and Croatia, they really have to work hard to reach their audience. So I don't think it's comparable. But you have great bands now too. Let's not get into that though.
Yeah, okay, Vlada. I think you owe us your rating for this magnificent album.
Oh yeah, my rating is 8.5. I think it would have been higher perhaps, but I just feel that I don't know. I miss that one big song that, for example, they had Niko Kao Ja, another song on Paket Aranžman, which was the record that I previously mentioned. And I feel they don't have such a strong song here. So maybe that's the reason why I would say 8.5. But it's still worth listening to, of course, and that's an excellent rating.
All right, Vlada, fair enough. So, what would be your final verdict on this type of music? And as a huge music fan from the Balkans, what would you say?
So I think that this is something that should be canon uh, with fans of new wave. This record should be canon, much like so many other records by the Talking Heads or by Per EB or by the Police or I don't know. All these bands are canon. This should be canon too. So pick it up, take a listen. For example, this band even got to open for Gang of Four during their very short career. So that's something else to be mentioned. And if you like Gang of Four, you will love these guys too.
Okay, Vlada, great. So, guys, um, thanks a lot for listening to this chat. I hope that this episode was educational, interesting, and insightful, and that you are now more acquainted with uh, the music from the Balkans, uh, old music from the Balkans in a way, let's say. But before we sign off, we just want to remind you guys to check out our sponsor, Brown Duck Promo. So we've got two great guys, two absolute professionals, Tony and Matthew. If you need any decals, mugs, t-shirts, calendars, You can go and check them out on their website, browndogpromos.com, or their social media, Brown Dog Promos, and at Brown Dog Promos. Right, Vlada?
Right. These guys are awesome. If you have a company, for example, or any business, and you need to have printed pens or mugs or anything like that, these guys will do it for you. Of course, US based. So please check them out. If you have a business, these are the guys for you. Awesome sponsors. We're so fortunate to have such great sponsors, and we are more than glad to talk about their products as well.
Shout out to all of our listeners on New England Radio, and shout out to our friend David, who is also our US partner. So thanks a lot, guys. And okay, Vlada, any final words for this episode?
Well, all I have to say now, I think that we pretty much covered everything we could, even though we could talk about this for hours. All I have to say is that we're going to link these records under our posts on social networks. So if you're interested in this music, please give these bands a listen. You will be amazed, I think, and you may find your new favorite band even.
Strong words there. Okay. So, guys, thanks a lot for tuning in, listening to us, supporting us, giving us feedback. We always appreciate any kind of feedback, whether we said something ridiculous, whether we were spot on, whatever you like. Just send us an email, post a comment, or whatever you like. You can follow us on social media at Soundrise Pod, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you would like to support our show, you can join our Patreon community for just as little as $1 per month. You know, that would mean a lot to us, and that would help our project grow. So check that out, and till the next time, see you soon.
Write a review, and then you can share it
with the world
in any social media platform.
And then your friends see it, and you can share and discover new shows together.
This is Steph, instigator of Pod Rev Day, Podcast Review Day.
And I'm Andy from Inspired Money.
And I'm Ariel of Earbuds Podcast Collective and Castbox.
We're here to tell you everything you need to know about Pod Rev Day,
which is on the 8th of every month, of every year, of every century, of every, you get it.
We are posting podcast reviews as part of hashtag PodRevDay, Podcast Review Day.
Because podcasters work their butts off and deserve to know how much they've impacted your lives. And you can do that through reviews.
Even 1 star feels surprisingly good.
Does it?
It lets you know that people are at least listening.
Don't be a passive podcast listener. Write a review and tell your favorite creator what you love about their podcast or about a specific episode.
And to participate, you just need to do 1 review.
And we'll see you every 8th of the month.
Pod Rev Day, because podcasters deserve to hear it.
Hashtag
Pod Rev Day. PODREVDAY.